Hello everyone and welcome to FreezeME, a 3D platformer heavily inspired by the Mario 3D platformers, and I'm sure that will become incredibly apparent on its own. That guy is Piggleton. He's the fastest entity in Fat the Cat Land, and he's our ticket to our first golden cube, which is how we proceed through the levels. It is perfectly possible to outrun Piggleton here, but if we don't follow right behind him, then we won't trigger all of his dialogue and all of his cutscenes, and he'll keep repeating this running animation each time we start the level, so it's good to get it out of the way early. I mean, I assume most people would follow right behind him because he has a giant red exclamation point. I'm just saying that if you want to be smart and skip past him and get the first golden cube without talking to him, you can, but he'll restart this cutscene and running animation every time. While we're on the topic of Piggleton, he seems really terrified of us in our camera for some reason. All the more reason to stalk him, right? We'll stop chasing him as soon as he tells us where we are and what we're doing here. Also, here, look, a heart container. There are 3 of these hidden in the game, and we've already got the first one, and they are very important. So we have our first objective. We want to freeze the monster bouncing right here and jump on top of him to get the golden cube, of which we need 24 to find Fat the Cat. Welcome to the hub world of Piggleton. This is where we can access all the levels and many extra goodies we can find throughout the game. This gate right here leads back where we were in Sunshine Valley. Welcome back to Sunshine Valley, and this time there is no Piggleton here, so we can just get straight to 3D platforming. FreezeME is an open world platformer, which means we can collect any of the cubes in any order, but if we select a certain cube from that menu back there, it will show us the way to it. There are also different signs that appear in the world depending on which cube you choose, just in case you get lost. Now these moving platforms are out of sync, so we're going to need to freeze one of them. And when we freeze something, it completely stays put until it unfreezes, and if we didn't freeze one of these platforms, then we wouldn't be able to make the jump, because they would always be out of sync. It's a good introduction to using the freezing mechanic for platforming. I mean, we did a while ago to freeze that enemy, but Piggleton told us to do that one. And this time we're on our own. These bouncing platforms do not bounce us very high, so it's important to keep that in mind whenever we decide to traverse them. The gate that was trapping the golden cube is now open. Of course, if you somehow miss that red button to open it, I would lose all faith in you. These red plumes of fire are incredibly easy to jump past. As for these rotating ones up here, we could freeze them with our camera to make them even easier, but we can also just scoot past them. This is nothing you should have any trouble with if you've ever played a 3D platformer before in your life. You may be surprised to learn that it's already time for the first boss fight against Logalo. And as is par for the course with all my Let's Plays, we're going to be doing some minor exploitation. We're supposed to climb the mountain from the other side, but we're going to come around the back and use a quick little shortcut. You're definitely not supposed to jump on this cannon, and you're definitely not supposed to use the cannon to jump onto the mountain, but we're going to do it anyway. This is also a good introduction to our basic attack, which is just a normal kick. It's a good idea to kick a while before we actually run into the enemies, because the kick's hitbox is pretty lenient toward us. Also, obviously, if we run into those metal balls, we'll take damage. We want to come over here to talk to this fella real quick. Not just because he says he's lonely, but because he'll give us a screw. And screws are some of the most valuable collectibles in the game. You'll see exactly what they're for later, but for now we have a boss fight to face off against. These two enemies would normally be difficult to fight, but we're just gonna backflip past them and right up to the boss. In order to harm Logalo, we first have to freeze him using our camera, and then run one of these screaming enemies into him. These enemies aren't like the normal enemies because they run at you and then explode, so we just have to bait them into running into Logalo while he's still stunned with our camera. And he only takes 3 hits to go down. The timing is very lenient because the explosive radius these enemies have is kind of enormous, and if Logalo unfreezes, we can freeze him again before they explode like this. Yarr. The game would have to try very, very hard to make its objectives more Mario than they already are. But anyway, it's time for the game's gravity mechanics, which are very reminiscent of Super Mario Galaxy, as you might have guessed. We are currently abusing the hell out of the slide to move as quickly as possible, which, let's be honest here, this is the only way to travel. Before we can get on that planet with the golden cube, we need to activate a switch. And to do that, we need to get on this cube, which is our first introduction to the gravity mechanics. Works almost exactly like the gravity in Mario Galaxy, but a lot more strict. That switch activated a yellow moving platform, so now we can climb the tower up to the catapult. And the catapult works a lot like you might expect a catapult to work, which is to say it's the cannons from Mario 64. If you didn't know you had to activate the switch, then talking to this pig next to the tower, he would tell you where the switch was. That didn't stop me from getting lost the first time anyway, but that was really my fault. The climb up the tower is, like many things, easily cheesed using the game's slide mechanic, and I intend to demonstrate that right here. We're supposed to use these floating platforms to get up, but we can just do this instead. And we need to use that screw we got in the last mission in order to fix this catapult. Each catapult requires a screw, so screws are very valuable because we can't get some golden cubes without them. In order to get onto the planet, we just want to aim the top of the arrow at it. We unlocked a new area, but let's not go there yet. Let's finish up Sunshine Valley first. Just like last time, we have to haul our ass over to the objective using our slide. And just like last time, we have a bit of an exploit when we get there. If you're looking at all this neat stuff we're passing by and thinking, man, why aren't you playing with any of that? It's because we're gonna do that in the second half of the game. Right now, our sole objective is to get all the golden cubes we can because we need to get into Fat the Cat's den and free our dog friend. We've reached our objective and we're supposed to push a crate onto one of these 4 gas vents and ride the crate up to our golden cube, but instead we're going to use this gravity cube from the last mission and skip the entire puzzle where we need to move the crate. After we jump onto the spinning platform, we actually have a relatively difficult to time jump because we have to keep adjusting ourselves on this thing. But after you observe the way the block moves a couple of times, you should be able to jump before it smashes down. No problem. And these large enemies can only be killed when they're stunned with our camera, but I took too long to stun them, so I get hit by one anyway. But still, there's just a few crumbling platforms, and then here we are at the golden cube. This time the camera zoomed in on a statue of Piggleton instead of, well, a golden cube, and you might think that's a bit odd, or you might think we're gonna race Piggleton. That second thing is correct, because as I said, this game is heavily inspired by Mario, and that includes having foot races against a secondary character. And you won't get any extra points for guessing exactly how we beat him in the race either. So yeah, we win the race against Piggleton by abusing our slide constantly. To the game's credit, it does throw logs at us while we try and race him, but that's pretty much the only hazard in the entire thing. Now, aside from getting to the goal, we do have to pass through all the checkpoints, otherwise we could cut across half the map easily. Still, yeah, if you're playing this yourself, all you need to do is alternate between the dash and jump buttons, the slide and jump buttons, and you've got this in the bag. There is a bit at the very end where we have to go uphill, but luckily for us, the slide works just as well uphill. Much faster than jumping up the hill, in fact. Alright, it's time to climb up probably the most interesting hill in the level, or tower rather. And we are going to end up using our camera again for this one, but first, we're going to grab one of these angry exploding enemies, and toss him at this brick wall. It blows it apart, and inside we can see a small cage with a screw in it. Now you know what screws do, and we're not going to need this one for this level. But we're gonna need it for one in the future, trust me. It just seemed like a good idea to get that out of the way since we were headed this direction. This tower we're about to ascend has the most challenging platforming yet, which isn't saying much considering how easy the first world is. But it's still something, right? These platforms with the giant holes in them have targets at their sides, so that way you can freeze them in the optimum position to be stepped on. Of course, if you end up freezing them at the wrong time and try to jump on them, you'll just jump straight through the hole and fall all the way down. And this game does have fall damage, so that wouldn't be very good. If they start to unfreeze while we're standing on them, we can thankfully, freeze them immediately. Multiple objects can be frozen at a time, but each object has its own individual timer. For example, these flipping platforms with the holes in them would freeze for a different period of time than the enemies would freeze. It all depends on how long the developers wanted the object to be frozen for game balancing purposes. We've nearly reached the center of the tower, which is not the goal, but it is the center of the tower, and it's also a good place to put a checkpoint. Fortunately, the game agrees with us, and here's a checkpoint. We can use these to teleport from place to place, and they're always put in very convenient spots so we can get around the level a lot easier. You don't have to wall jump a lot in this game, so it's easy to forget you have it, but you do have it. Now I imagine you're meant to freeze these rotating platforms in the optimum position for you to leap on them. With some fancy mid-air sliding, we can pull it off without that. The main challenge being, of course, not jumping into the spikes. That was close, but if we fell down, we could just use a teleporter to get back up here. As was already said, these bouncing platforms do not bounce us very high, so we need to adjust our expectations accordingly. There are many things I enjoy about 3D Mario games, and one of the things I enjoy most is the gimmicks. This is an incredibly gimmicky golden cube, and there's at least one of these in each world. They do get progressively more challenging, but this one isn't challenging in the slightest. We see a big red button, so of course we're going to press it, and when we press it, a timer starts. The timer, however, is way too strict for us to collect all these coins, so we can freeze it with our camera as I just demonstrated. Now the camera will unfreeze shortly, meaning we have to keep coming back to freeze it again. If you want to make absolutely sure the timer won't run out, you can just stand in front of it and wait for it to unfreeze. But you shouldn't lose more than a few seconds by running back to it. 2 of the coins are hidden on the sides of the tower, one of them is underneath this wood, and the other one is behind these blocks, and we have to shimmy. Please make sure you keep the control stick up against the wall you're shimmying on, otherwise your character will freak out and cause a glitch. If you ever plan on playing the game yourself, I want you to keep that in mind, alright? Those 2 hidden coins were the only really challenging thing about this mission, so now we just need to collect the rest on these steps on the way up, and then the golden cube will spawn for us. Hey, do you remember that tower where we activated the checkpoint? Well, we're gonna head back there using this checkpoint. This one is activated from the start because it's, well, at the start. And this time we're gonna head to the opposite side of the tower for the hardest platforming section of the level, which isn't saying much. We want to freeze this rotating platform, so we can jump on the rotating platform above it, because otherwise they would be out of sync. And right up here, there's some genuinely challenging moving blocks that are see-through, which makes it incredibly difficult to tell which side is facing where. Fortunately, we just used that bouncing block to bypass it completely. Yep, one of the few bouncing platforms in the level that actually gives us decent height, and this is the last golden cube of the video.